part of chapter 1 and Halo. Maybe make some comments as I read just to kind of get us going on our Palo book and our explorations of medium. So I'm on page 15, part 1, studio explorations, and we'll see how it goes. I haven't read this in a bit, but I want you to think about why Ann Palo thinks a studio like kind of environment in a classroom is the way to go. And what we would want to share, even if we don't have a studio, what would we want to share with parents about art explorations and how to maybe extend some of those opportunities to children at their houses? All right. In part 1, we introduced children to art media through open-ended, full-bodied explorations. Through these explorations, children come to know the characteristics of and possibilities for a medium, how it behaves, how it feels on their body, how it can be used, what skills and materials are needed to work with it. This knowledge provides the foundation for using art as a tool for thinking in the classroom. So to me, that means as a tool for our content that we're teaching, that it's a lesson, it's a way to provide opportunities for child development. Chapter 1 provides general guidelines for setting up a studio space in your childcare environment and introducing materials to children. Building on these general guidelines, we dive into explorations with art media. In chapter 2 through 5, you will find art explorations related to texture, movement, color, sculpting, and building, and representational drawing and painting, all of which we're going to do in like a week. Woo! All right, general guidelines for studio explorations. And I will say, like, some classrooms are so, this is hard, and I don't see it. I've only seen it at IC3 in a couple of spaces where they unusually had more than one room to do their classroom, or it was a very, like, it was just organically kind of divided into two. But let's see what Palo says about this. To learn to speak a language, we begin with the foundational sounds. We experiment with how to shape our mouths and tongues. We play with tone and inflection. We listen to other people mimicking the sounds we hear. We begin to weave sounds together, vowels and consonants forged into words. In time, we no longer feel clumsy, and this new language becomes familiar. Eventually, our dreams unfold in this new language. We've claimed it as our own. In just this way, we learn the language of art. We explore the physical qualities of a particular medium, how it feels on our hands, how it moves across paper, how it holds its shape. We experiment with materials and with techniques. And through many encounters and engaged exploration, we become comfortable with this new art medium. We begin to think in terms of color, texture, movement, and sculptural image. We've claimed the language of art as our own. One of the reasons this language aspect has become so important is that more and more they're saying that our curriculum is building the language exposure to children early childhood. So when I think about the language of fantasy play or story that Vivian Paley is kind of sharing with children, I'm thinking that she's sharing Once Upon a Time, the end, the story progression, a hero, a heroine, um, good guy, bad guy, a princess, mommy and babies, acting it out on a stage. There's all sorts of language with each area of literacy. And so this literacy is really about art, the language of art. And since we know in early childhood through Montessori that children learn first through their five senses, this becomes even more relatable to the language of art because it's not like they have to read in order to do it. They have to touch it. They have to move it around. They can feel it. They can see what they can do with it with their hands, with the brush, etc. And so it does give them some different ways to explore than sometimes they can do with story. Even if they're illustrating, it could be illustrating their story, right? Let's see what they say. All right, Giovanni Piazza an educator in the schools of Reggio Emilia, Italy. If only we could all go there, right? Describes the process of learning the qualities and characteristics of an art medium as learning the alphabet. It is through interactions between a child and a material that an alphabet can develop. He says as the children use paper, clay, wire, and so on, different alphabets will develop from different materials. As children use their minds and hands to act on materials using gestures and tools and begin to acquire skills, experience, strategies, and rules, structures are developed within the child that can be considered a sort of alphabet or grammar. That's cool. Piazza points us toward key elements in children's encounters with an art medium. Young children use their minds and hands, not just mucking around, but they use gestures and materials which develop their skills and strategies. They braid together the knowledge they develop with their hands, knowledge of texture, density, movement, shade, tone, contrast, pliability, rigidity, with the knowledge they develop by observing and reflecting on the properties of an art medium. As a result, they grow into skillful mastery that allows them to use an art medium for self-expression. And again, there is this one person who believes children need to be exposed to 30 million words. So when you start using these words, it's not like you're using too big of words with children, it's just that you're exposing them to it. So when you use a bigger word like medium, we might then say materials, or like, for example, paint and clay and wire are materials or mediums that artists use to create art. All right. Learning the alphabet, developing grammar requires the guidance and support of an adult. As Jill Engelbreit Fox and Robert Schumacher write, young children will not automatically discover how to use a watercolor set. They need some directions and instructions in its use and care. They need not, however, be told what to paint or what it should look like. Very big difference. So teachers as guides show them how to use the materials, but then give the children the freedom to experiment with them to their own devices. To offer a guidance and facilitation as teachers, we create studio spaces or areas set aside for art exploration. We offer art materials in ways that communicate both intention and abundant possibilities. As young children explore an art medium, we help them to observe, notice, reflect, and make meaning, to sensually and consciously interact with the media. We also tend to our own learning and meaning making, expanding our understandings of the ways in which young children investigate and ask questions to construct understanding. Teachers don't have to be fluent in an art medium to invite children to develop their own fluency. We only have to be willing to investigate alongside the children in a shared spirit of committed curiosity, using our hands, intellect, eyes, imagination, past experiences, perseverance, and playfulness. We can learn the alphabet of an art medium together with the children. The following guidelines offer suggestions for way to begin this work. And then it starts to talk about the space. And many of you are in classrooms already where they're already using the space in a certain way. Usually we find in most early childhood classrooms that spaces are used for multiple purposes. Um, and I think that can be something that can be kind of at odds with what they would like in an ideal world for our students to be able to experience. But let's find out. So on page 18, it says creating a studio. A studio can take many forms. In your program, you might have ample space enough that you can dedicate an entire room to art to create a full-fledged studio. Not often that I've seen. Or you might have a corner in a classroom or your family childcare home that you can set apart from the hustle and bustle of the room's activity by using several simple screens or shelves, making the corner into an art studio during the times of day when children are engaged in play. The experiences that you and the children share in the space are what matter, not the formality of the space. I think that's pretty important. Art teacher Viavecchi describes an art studio as a place that research where imagination, rigor, experiment, creativity, and expression interweave and complete one another. This wonderfully captures the spirit that teachers seek to create when we set up an art studio. Whether it's a table with a few shelves in the corner of the room or a standalone large-scale art studio, an art studio is an intention for how a space is used. A simple table can come alive when it becomes a place where imagination, rigor, experiment, creativity are made tangible with paint, clay, and wire. And that, I mean, that's what Paley wanted too, is a table where it would be a place to dictate their stories. An art studio needs a few basic features: a tile floor, because it's gonna be messy, a table with plenty of workspace for 4 or 5 children and you, the teacher, good light from both natural and artificial sources, open storage shelves for art materials. These shelves should be at children's level and materials should not be kept in a closed cupboard that is inaccessible to children. Space for paintings to dry. This can be a drying rack, a clothesline from which paintings can be hung, or a shelf system with lots of space for large paintings. Space for three-dimensional sculptures to dry. Shelf space spaced so there's plenty of room between them works best for this. If your studio is within the classroom, find a way to set the studio space apart. Some programs use tall open shelving to create a wall around the studio space. Other programs use simple freestanding screens made of wood frames and sheer white fabric. Hanging sheer curtains like those designed for outdoor patios are another option. Vines planted in the box on the floor can grow up a trellis to create a living wall. The intention in dividing the studio from the rest of the classroom is to invite focus and intention to communicate to the children. You can immerse yourselves in this work. You can linger here uninterrupted. We honor your work here. Make the art studio space beautiful, a place that nourishes young children's spirit and senses. If you have the resources, store paint in clear jars to bring vibrant color into the room. Bring lush green plants into the space, pour glitter into glass jars, and set them on the window ledge to sparkle in the sun. Um, Arrange shells, rocks, or branches on the shelves or hang them on the wall. Tuck unexpected treasures into the studio, a vase of feathers, a basket of sea glass, or an abandoned bird's nest. Store paintbrushes in pottery jars. Create a space that stirs the imagination and awakens the senses. As you create your space, remember that a studio is as much about how we think about art practices as it is a specific space. Barbara Burrington writes that studio is a name that implies work, study, and art, all in a breath. A studio stands for a way of experiencing the possibilities of art materials in community with others. I think the other thing we have to think about is we often are co-teaching and we don't necessarily have control over the entire space. So there might be a shelf that is like where art materials are kept. Maybe you can make the art shelf area something that is beautiful, that is as close to some of what they're saying. But in our current situation, we may not be able to have a whole space. And I don't know if I believe that setting up screens in a busy pre-K classroom, or definitely not a toddler classroom, would be a good idea, so that like some of this is definitely ideal, right? And not like, I don't know, Palo. Not seeing it, but we don't know. Setting up the space. As you prepare to invite children into the art studio, arrange the workspace in a way that creates focus and attention. The table ought to be cleared of all but the materials you will need at the beginning of your exploration. The materials can be displayed with order and beauty in the center of the table. I do like some of these ideas. Like if we could get glass, I don't know if we want glass jars, maybe clear plastic jars with the glitter and stuff. I can see that really like inspiring some ideas for children. They love the glitter, they love the bright paint, and letting them be able to see all the materials that are available. Maybe we do have to limit them sometimes in terms of which ones we want them to focus on. But if we display them or present them, the provocations in a way that's like really appealing and inspiring, then we don't know what could happen. Um, and I think even if we're doing it in a different way that isn't out all the time, it can be when we're going to do the exploration, if we take these ideas and use that for how we present them to the children, I think that could be just, a great place to start, right? So each child's workspace can be defined with an echoing simplicity, a piece of white paper with a brush laid across the top, or a piece of canvas awaiting clay. The way that you arrange the space creates an invitation for children to bring their full attention to the art medium they are about to encounter. If you cover the table, use a simple plastic tablecloth or big pieces of butcher paper. I love to use butcher paper because then if they're doodling on it and stuff, you just don't know what you're going to end up with. Choose a neutral color, white, light, tan, or black, and avoid patterns or designs that usually take over the workspace. Table covering should emphasize the materials and the children's work, not distract from them. Be thoughtful about the sound in the studio space, again, with the intention of creating an environment that fosters quiet and concentration. You may strive to create silence. Or if your space is part of the larger classroom, you might use a CD player to play quiet, rhythmic, instrumental music that brings focus to the space. Have a plan for cleaning up before you begin. As children finish finger painting or working with clay, how will they wash their hands? How will they dry their hands? Where will children's paintings go to dry? Where will you set the clay pieces? And how will you label each child's wire sculpture when it's completed? Create a system for cleaning up and for tracking art pieces before you invite the children into the space so that you are not scrambling to figuring this out when your first child finishes her work. More guidelines for cleaning up will come later. So one thing I want to talk about is a lot of times we're on this bell kind of thing. Things are 10 minutes, things are you're going to be creative for 20 minutes and then we got to go outside. So, and then we send it home. I think we need to move away from that, this idea that it's one and done, because a lot of our work as we get older is really about revising and revisiting that idea of the recursion that Runco added to the art process. That's part of the writing process. And how many of us were high schoolers getting up at 3 in the morning and whipping off our paper? Well, guess what? In college, they want you to hand in a rough draft, then they want you to revise it, and then they want you to have a peer read it and you to revise it again. And so a lot of our work, I mean, and if you look at Paley, they're doing that with their stories anyway. They're revising each other's stories. They're adding to each other's stories. They're acting out each other's stories, but changing the ending. And so we want to let these things incubate and then let them go back to it. But way we set up our classrooms, we have activity time, we let things dry, and then we stick them in their cubbies to go home. We need to provide opportunities for them to revisit things if they want to, and that not every experiment or every experience needs to end with a product. Sometimes it's just an exploration of the materials, a sensory exploration. And I think I've shared this before, but I don't think it was with you guys. When I was teaching toddlers a long time ago, my co-teacher came up to me and was like, she wanted me to like think about using a table, like a little text table, and letting the paint on it, but not put paper. And then just clean it when they're done. She's like, we don't always have to have a piece of paper that's gonna dry. Like, just let them have it be the sensory experience. And I was like, what? That's not what, that's crazy. And now, like, it makes so much more sense. And I don't know if this is a developmental thing, like you have to be a teacher for a certain number of years. I don't know if I just don't know. But I get it so much more now that when it's open-ended and it's not so focused on the final piece, that children can make mistakes more easily. They can take risks more easily because they can just wipe it up and start over again. And I have so many students that can't do that, right? They're like, nope, I'm just gonna fail this class and then I'll take it over. Gotta start over, do it perfectly. And really teaching and learning is about making mistakes, learning from them, and growing. And when we keep starting over, trying to do it perfectly, we're anxious. We don't get done a lot of the time. We might get an ulcer, etc. Okay. So, page 20, I can barely see. Materials, media, and process. There are some materials that you will use in a number of art explorations and a few that are specific to particular art media. Each of the following chapters list the materials needed for the specific exploration. You can use these lists to stock your studio. As you gather materials, look in places like hardware stores, restaurant supply stores, kitchenware shops, yard sales, as well as the most typical art supply stores and school supply companies. A search on the internet will lead you to companies from whom you can order many materials. Inexpensive art materials are available at discount school supplies. And she gives a bunch of resources. Um, Gathering the children. Certainly, we want all the children in the classroom community to have lots of opportunities to explore each art medium. We also want each child to experience the luxuries of time, space, and attentive teacher support that allow deep relationships with art media to grow. For this to happen, young children ought not to be competing for resources for a teacher's attention. Small groups of no more than 6 and optimally 4 children are best. Again, not always that easy to pull off, right? Especially for extended periods of time. We'd really have to push ourselves out of our comfort zone and think about not just doing things a certain way because we've always done them that way, and really think about how can we really provide these opportunities and is it worth it? I believe it is, because this is how you provide, how you grow invention and creative thinking and risk takers and positive self-identity and self-esteem. All right. And then knowingly, Palo says, limiting a group size may feel like a daunting task. Most classroom groups hold many more than 6 children. Here are some strategies that teachers have used to build a small group of children, to bring a small group of children together for studio explorations. If your program has 2 adults, make a plan to invite a small group of children into the studio space with 1 adult while the other adult works with the remaining children. You might schedule this during a time when children are typically doing free choice activities. Another option is to schedule studio work during a time when children are typically doing small group work. Ask each parent to spend an hour in the classroom every few months. With the support of even 1 parent a week, teachers can carve out weekly small group experiences in the studio. Consider using floater positions as classroom support. In some half-day programs, teachers offer one another regular support by trading time. As teacher responsible for an afternoon group typically has planning and preparation time in the morning, instead that teacher could step into the morning class once or twice a week. She really wants you to do this, doesn't she? She's like, find more adults for your class. I do think, especially since our the Child Care Center at TC3 is part of TC3, and we have all these amazing early childhood teachers, there may be ways for our Child Care Center to think about opportunities to provide these kinds of experiences for children um, each semester, if we decided this was an important thing to our mission, right? But it's interesting, and I like to learn more about why Palo feels it's so important. When you gather children in the studio, you may decide that the group will stick together. You and the children will head to the studio at the same time and stay in the studio as a group until everyone's finished with the exploration and the studio is cleaned up. Or you might decide to create a more fluid coming and going between the small group in the studio and the rest of the children in the classroom. As each child finishes at his own pace, he neatens his workspace, then heads back to the classroom, allowing another child to join the studio group. Either way works fine, but it's best to have a clear plan on the outset. All right, introducing, so that's really the studio space, and then it's going to go into how the teacher should introduce materials. So I'm going to do that as a separate, I think, video. Um, I did at one point thought that there's an outdoor room at the Child Care Center that when Casey and I were first walking through the center, I think she called it the messy room. I kind of thought that that was going to be a studio space, and I think now it's a storage closet. I'm not sure. But this is not, there's so many different pulling um priorities that are important between being licensed, being accredited, etc. That it's really an artful balance to figure out how to provide these opportunities to children and how to still fulfill all the other things that you really need to do when you're providing a quality place of that will nurture creativity and build relationships and care for children. So I'm going to leave this here. I ended on page 22. We will talk about how to introduce a medium as well. But I also want you to see Palo in her classroom in action and see, is this really get looking old? Like it's a little dated, but it's so good. So if you were surprised that Paley was teaching, had children like pretending it was 9/11 and coming up with better endings than what we actually had, then you might be surprised that this Palo video starts out with a provocation from a family that a child is obsessed with this history book about the Titanic. Yes, a ship that like went down and all these people died. So it's fascinating how we often will avoid these complex topics or whatever, and yet children's like with the my little minutest little like provocation will grab onto it and create an entire pretend thing about it. So even if you decided like as a group that you're not going to do like these kinds of topics, there's little doubt that children may end up doing it anyway, right? Because someone will bring it in and they'll be playing it and whatever. So I think sometimes it's better to guide, to observe, and learn what the children are working through personally. I'm not thinking that I'm going to control their pretend play because I'm not comfortable with them being comfortable talking about something or trying to think of a better way for it to have ended. Maybe that's how we get out of some of these really tragic circumstances, is these children grow into adults and they've imagined better endings. I don't know. Certainly not working what we got now. All right. So I'm gonna leave it here. I want you to, one of the things you're gonna have to do is write up what you think the studio space is about, how it could work in a classroom. I would also think about pairing that with a story play space. And I want you to watch the video. It's called Sail. We Set Sail, I think, and it's about the Titanic, but it's much broader than that. It's a really it's an amazing investigation into something that becomes much bigger than the Titanic. It's science, math, history, literacy, music, art, all like in one. So it's kind of like across all um content areas. So kind of, I will write up questions for you, but I would take notes on things that catch your eye, that catch your attention, and basically thinking about your artist investigation that we're going to be doing. Hopefully, you've all chosen an artist now. I'm trying to get back to people about which ones they will have. If you haven't done that, you want to look for that. But this is all going towards how do we share these opportunities with children? How do we have a vision of our own class and what we want it to look like? So that's kind of what you should be thinking about as you're looking at these things. How do I create a vision of my classroom that'll nurture creativity, that maybe has a studio space and has a space for story, um, dedicated to acting out story, and in all of those different rungs of that ladder. All right. Thank you.